Jai Hind, Namaste. I welcome you all to the day's program by Center for Knowledge Sovereignty, CKS.
Some of the aspects that I will try and address. So what is the main issue?
Work which you have done, you revamped the entire AD there, which should be known to the people, and people who have just joined or may not know details.
Jai Hind, Namaste. I welcome you all to the day's program by Center for Knowledge Sovereignty, CKS. CKS is an established think tank and has been spreading awareness about data sovereignty and cybersecurity at strategic, political, and national levels. CKS is a non-partisan nationalistic think tank which has been spreading intellectual content with focus on the spheres of technology, public policy, and research. So far, from the CKS platform, we had the honor to host Veteran General PR Shankar, General Sanjay Kulkarni, General Syed Ata Hasnain, and Vice Admiral Sekhar Sinha sir under the 5-part series webinar, Thus Spake Generals. Today, in our concluding talk of the series, we are honored and privileged to have with us Veteran Air Marshal SS Soman, PVSM, AVSM, VM. Sir was commissioned in the flying branch of the Indian Air Force in December 1976 and has more than 3,400 hours of flying on fighter aircraft. In his illustrious career of 4 decades, Air Marshal Soman held many important field appointments, which include commanding officer of a fighter squadron, chief flying instructor at Flying Instructors School, chief operations officer at Srinagar during Operation Parakram, and air officer commanding of a premier IAF base. In staff appointments of air ranks, he served as Assistant Defense Advisor at the High Commission of India, Dhaka, and at Air Headquarters, Delhi, served as Principal Director Operations Space and Principal Director Flight Safety. He was AD Commander in WAC and was Senior Air Staff Officer in Southwestern Air Command, Gandhinagar. Just before retirement in 2015, he held prestigious appointment of AOC in C of Western Air Command. He is an alumnus of Defense Services Staff College and has graduated from Air War College, USA. At present, he holds the Marshal of the Indian Air Force Chair at the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies at Savitribai Phule University, Pune. He is also on the Executive Council of the Center for Advanced Strategic Studies at Pune. I now request Air Vice Marshal Pranay Sinha, VSM retired, moderator of the session, to take the program further. Viewers, AVM Pranay Sinha, as an aeronautical engineer, was trained on various fighter aircrafts like the MiG-21, MiG-23BN, and Sukhoi 30X Russia. In his 35 years of distinguished career, he held many important field and staff appointments. He commanded Premier Base Repair Depot of EW System, and just before retirement in September 2018, was commandant of the prestigious Software Development Institute, Bengaluru. Since then, he is working as advisor to BEL and is an active member of our think tank. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, viewers, and thanks, Dr. Deepa. Viewers, as you all know, she is a combat ration expert, ex-CSIR scientist from CFTRI, trained at Defense Food Research Lab, Mysuru. Presently, she is working on a very innovative food idea that once consumed by our air crews, then they will remain satisfied with full stomach for a very long sort of duration. Viewers, as Dr. Deepa said, today we are at our concluding talk of our webinar series, Thus Spake Generals, the tagline adopted based on the philosophical book of 1882 by the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, Thus Zarathustra. And in this book, Nietzsche propounds 3 metamorphoses that individuals should undergo through his life cycle to discover the true freedom. Using allegorical imagery, he describes the metamorphosis in terms of one has to go through the camel, camel-like, the lion, and finally the child. Explaining the necessity of second metamorphosis of lion, Nietzsche proposes that to acquire the lordship of the desert from the existing desert's lord, the dragon, which is great barriers to the true spirit of freedom, lion must take on the dragon and should capture the freedom. Viewers, come to circa May 2020. At our Himalayan doors, we have an intruder dragon with its tail wagging even in the Indian Ocean. Time has come to shed the image of lucky go elephant and to show the world we are in making of Atmanirbhar lion. Yes, all the generals, as mentioned by Deepa, who came and spoke from this platform till now insisted on the Atmanirbhar theme. General Shankar in the first talk said that India should go with Quad and build its capabilities. General Kulkarni focused on Ladakh standoff, said that it's going to be a long haul and insisted to bring on more boots on the ground, build more bunkers, infrastructure. General Hasnain was emphatic in saying that there should be no shortcut to capability development, be it infrastructure or defense preparedness or cyber maritime. And then Admiral Sekhar Sinha assured in his talk that India is increasing its strategic reach in the Indian Ocean region. It is refocusing its attention from continental India to the peninsular India and is trying to obviate sea blindness. Ladies and gentlemen, but still we have not heard from this platform about the employment of air power. Has the time come to remove the air power blindness, to let the roar of lion through the deafening sound of fighter jets send tremor in the spines of dragon to disrupt the disengagement and de-escalation drama at the Ladakh? And who else better than Air Marshal Soman, having served in almost all operational portfolios of Western Air Command, is equipped to do so? Navash Parsham Deeptam. Sir, the airspace is yours. Over to you, sir. Soman, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Deepa and Air Vice Marshal for those kind words and a very loaded introduction. I would also like to thank Mr. Vineet Goenka and CKS for having invited me for this talk on this forum. And thank you so much. So today, I have been asked to speak on a very specific topic, relevance of air power in the Ladakh standoff. So willy-nilly, the scope narrows down to two specific aspects, air power and standoff. The subject by its very nature would lead you to believe that I'm going to be an advocate for air power, which is right. But let me also assure you that I remain a strong and an unflinching proponent for integrated military operations with jointness center stage in whatever I say and underscored by a search for solutions towards the standoff. Before I commence, I intend to provide a brief backdrop for my talk, which will also give a gist of what I would cover. China is playing the great game. It is aspiring to be the world leader in the future. China believes in power politics and wishes to establish its primacy in South Asia and the Indian Ocean region. China does not see the rise of India in its interests. It desires that India accept a subpower status. It is ensuring this by keeping the border unresolved and unsettled. It also intends to sustain the hostility between India and Pakistan so that we remain engaged and diverted from our economic development and growth. As regards the standoff, China has an agenda and is controlling the narrative. We have two broad choices: either reconcile with the fait accompli of loss of territory or resist Chinese aggression through a pushback or by demanding a status quo. There was a pushback from our side, but we have now opted to seek a status quo. Though we want to be firm in our approach, militarily, we wish to pursue it in a non-escalatory manner. However, this has led to a deadlock. So there is a need to review our politico-military strategy to ensure that the standoff is resolved on terms that are acceptable to India. This strategy would necessitate a more prominent role for air power in our unified military strategy. Now, coming to the subject per se, the standoff has been more than a year old and has created an impasse in the bilateral relations. So what are the implications of the standoff? Where do we stand today? And more importantly, what needs to be done? As regards the relevance of air power, its significance as an instrument of military power in statecraft and its role in shaping decisive outcomes in conflicts needs no elaboration. Since the Ladakh standoff had a military dimension, there is a need to examine the contribution of air power in our context. So was air power employed optimally? If not, then what were the reasons? On a larger note, examining the employment of air power in our case, two questions arise. First, has the relevance of air power in our context been diluted due to an air power blindness that we have developed over the years? And second, will the blindness be aggravated because of the process that we have adopted towards theaterization? So these are some of the aspects that I will try and address. So what is the main issue? Simply put, the issue is that the Chinese over the years have almost reached their 1959 claim line in Ladakh. They continue with their land-nibbling forays, and we are still in search of a solution. So obviously the approach that we had adopted has not worked, and there is a need for a change. So what needs to be done? First and foremost, we need to examine the circumstances and shortcomings that created the issue. And if we intend to resolve the issue expeditiously, then we need to look at it dispassionately, recognize the shortcomings, accept them, and take remedial measures. The Indo-China dispute is more than a century old. The more you go back in time to understand the issue, the more it becomes complicated and fuzzy. But we need a starting point for reckoning. To my mind, there are three distinct years which have significance related to the issue. 1959, when China asserted its border claim. 1962, when we fought a war with China. And 1993, when we signed the Peace and Tranquility Treaty. The choice of the year 1993 as a year for reckoning is more appropriate, as it has relevance both to the past and the present. What stands established as of now is that over the years we have lost our territory, access to some petrol routes and points. While that is unacceptable, the real matter of concern is that there is no accountability or responsibility for the territorial loss at the personal or the institutional level. Even worse is that the actions are justified and vindicated through refrains. The first is by rationalizing to say that loss predates one's tenure, be it political dispensations or tenures of diplomatic and military heads. The refrain is that it was not under my watch, so one can't be held accountable. Second is to call it a legacy issue. So rationalize it by saying that the issue was inherited, particularly the shifted LAC. Third is to term it as an ongoing process, observing that it will take time to resolve. So in a way to vindicate your actions. Cite example, Sundarangchu took 9 years, Pangong took 10 months, Doklam took 73 days. Of course, in Doklam we discount the fact that the disengagement was only at the face-off site. Since then, practically the whole plateau has been ingressed by China. But more importantly, does the problem get over with the resolution in Ladakh? The answer is an emphatic no. As a PLA is like a COVID virus. It will mutate and appear again in the eastern or middle sector and could also re-emerge in Ladakh. Again, as the claim lines will continue to shift. The recent Chinese claim line in the Galwan Valley has already moved westwards up to the confluence of the Shok and the Galwan River. Also, we need to remember that with the expansionist designs of China, some of the dormant issues like Arunachal Pradesh could surface and become pressure points. Remember, China has made claims for the whole of Arunachal as recent as in September 2020. China considers Arunachal as southern Tibet and has named it Zhangnam. Also, Xi Jinping on numerous occasions has said that China would reclaim all territories bequeathed to it by its forefathers. So the whole issue calls for a comprehensive analysis, and we need to look well beyond Ladakh. The former National Security Advisor, Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, has opined in his recent book that we need to review our politico-military strategy with China. So to begin with, why have we come to this pass? Before assessing the actual reasons, there is a syndrome that we have lived with that could be coined as past perfect, future capable, but present unprepared. So we are either perfecting the past or building capabilities for the future, but fail to address the extant requirements. This has been due to several dichotomies, paradoxes, and disconnects which exist in the backdrop that shape our overall responses, be it political, diplomatic, or military. They also have a debilitating effect on our military capability and effectiveness. So what are these dichotomies, paradoxes, and disconnects? They show up in 5 areas, namely our resolve and ground reality, military capability, strategy, force structure, and jointness. Let me comment on each of them briefly. First, there is a disconnect between our resolve and ground reality in Aksai Chin because of variance in the declared policy and the ground reality. The declared policy in Aksai Chin is that it is a part of India, while the ground reality is that large parts are already under Chinese possession. To reclaim the territory, we need to resolve the matter politically or need the military capability to recover the area. The fact that the disconnect exists shows that we have not been successful in both. But the politico-diplomatic strategy will be only as good as a military capability. So it boils down to the military capability. Here, now we face a unique defense paradox. The paradox is that we claim we are ready when we are unprepared. Prepared and ready are two terms that are often used interchangeably, though they have a subtle difference. Being prepared for a task involves actions taken beforehand, to successfully conduct a task. On the other hand, being ready indicates a present state to act immediately in the hope of a favorable outcome. Hence, preparation would precede readiness, and one would be ready if one is fully prepared. In defense parlance, preparation and readiness relates to acquiring a joint military capability that should dissuade and deter our adversaries and win wars if they are forced on us. In the past, our unprepared state has been often highlighted by several agencies. These include observations made by the Defense Parliamentary Committees, CAG reports, and senior military leadership. Additionally, the unpreparedness has always showed up in our mind states and expressions during 4 distinct periods of time, namely during periods of peace, during conflict, post-crisis, and periods of normalcy. So during peace, we are confident of our capabilities and we claim we are prepared and ready to achieve decisive outcomes in war. However, during conflicts, there is a hard reckoning of our capabilities, resulting in the leadership reconciling with reality and stating now that we will fight with what we have. Post-crisis is followed by a sober reflection of the inadequacies and ruing the absence of game changers. With gradual return of normalcy, we transit to extol our actions and exude triumphalism. This triumphalism precludes us from learning valuable lessons. Actually, it is only natural and is to be expected that once the crisis abates, there is bound to be pressure on any political establishment to pass it off as a victory, a display of steely will, which forced the adversary to back down. So facts are selectively highlighted as the political narrative is crafted and the inconvenient truths buried under the fanfare. But most unfortunately, this seems to also affect professional military appraisals, and hence weaknesses remain as they were. The result is that we have got ourselves in a mindset trap that all is well. These attitudes have sustained the defense paradox over the years and has prevented us from learning lessons. The unlearned lessons have resulted in ineffective operational responses, as witnessed in IPKF and the Kargil War. The victories did come, but at huge costs in terms of loss of lives and material resources. As regards strategy, we have articulated separate strategies for Pakistan and China. While we advocate a punitive deterrence against Pakistan, we specify a credible deterrence against China. By punitive deterrence, we mean that we have an overwhelming higher military power for punitive action against Pakistan. By credible deterrence, we mean that the Chinese should know that India has the ability for a counter operation and the ability to inflict damage. However, a strategy of credible deterrence has not stopped China from encroaching into our territory, nor have we been able to push them back with the use of force. So there is a need to rethink our strategy against China. There are 2 known strategies: deterrence by punishment and deterrence by denial. Stronger powers with abundance of assets resort to deterrence by punishment, either through the threat or actual use of force, to get their way through. This strategy requires preponderance of military might over the adversary. The credibility follows, and one does not have to say it. The relatively weaker powers resort to deterrence by denial. In this strategy, you physically and aggressively block an adversary from achieving his aims. For example, actions at Galwan and North Pangong, where we stopped them from ingressing. But we have not been able to replicate this in other areas such as Hot Springs, Gogra, and Depsang. Next is jointmanship or jointness. Jointness, very simply put, would mean getting together or integrating for a common purpose. Jointness within the armed forces has been elusive, and it has been ad hoc, episodic, transactional, and personality driven. Now, in our context, I could categorize jointness in 4 categories. Symbolic jointness exists under peacetime and is characterized by getting together to act, to get along. The second is operational jointness that has been elusive and what we should strive for, and characterized by getting together to fight together. The US achieved this after 4.5 years of legislative effort that culminated in the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986. This was a result of wide-ranging legislative deliberations over 4.5 years, where all the services were consulted. The third jointness is crisis jointness. The jointness comes into play during crisis times, when each service reaches out to the other for cooperation, as actual service capabilities fall well short of the claimed peacetime capabilities. Now, with your back against the wall, there is very little choice but to cooperate. This is characterized by getting together to manage and contain. Unfortunately, this jointness is just a temporary coupling and vanishes once the crisis blows over. The fourth category is enforced jointness. When it is enforced from the top, unfortunately, under this jointness, no reconciliation is done between individual service doctrines, employment philosophies, domain tenets, and service characteristics. This is characterized by getting together under orders. This has its own adverse effects. Coming to force structure, our present force structure is suboptimal and skewed. Force structures need to be driven primarily by op necessity and financial affordability. The logical development of the force structure should commence by outlining the threats, evolving a strategy, determining the requirements, determining the affordability, developing an appropriate and affordable capability, and ensuring its efficacy and relevance through periodic reviews. There are shortfalls in our present force structure. In the drive towards theaterization, the force structure is going to witness a rapid transformation. For theaterization to succeed, the dichotomies in doctrines, organizing principles, and employment of the three services need to be reconciled for unification, and critical issues need to be addressed. Efforts to resolve the dichotomies through structural changes like theater commands would be chaotic. Now, coming to the standoff per se, it has its origins in the age-old ongoing border dispute, which has only complicated with passage of time. The reason for selecting 1993 as a year of reckoning is that both countries seemingly tried to establish peace on the borders, yet it set the stage for China to pursue its expansionist designs. How? India and China signed the Peace and Tranquility Treaty in 1993. The treaty intended to prevent violence at the LAC and to give the political authorities a chance to resolve the border dispute through negotiations that would enable the delineation of a single common boundary between the two countries. The treaty envisaged the two sides to accept the existing military positions on the disputed border without prejudice to each other's stated positions. However, during the treaty, the nomenclature of the line marking the existing military positions changed several times till it suited Chinese designs. The line originally envisaged as the line of peace and tranquility changed on Chinese insistence to the line of active control and then to the line of actual control. The idea of the LAC was that each side would exercise control up to its existing military positions. Now, while India interpreted it in the spirit of the agreement, China manipulated the interpretation of the LAC to be the 1959/60 claim line. Now, the differing interpretations created undefined gray zones. The patrols on both sides were expected to operate in the undefined gray zones without threats of obstruction by the opposite side. Now, while Chinese patrols often penetrated new areas, although within their limits of their own claim lines, which was actually the 1959 line, Indian forces rarely reached the limits of their own claim lines that were lying within Chinese controlled territory. As a result, Chinese patrols over time extended the ambit of their operations, expanding the reach into territories that they had not patrolled before and nibbling more territory. So over the years, the Chinese have incrementally moved westwards to align the LAC with their claim line of 1959. This has also been observed by a former ambassador to China, Mr. Gautam Bambavle, in a recent article. The issue has remained unresolved as the Chinese have not agreed to the basis of resolution like historical and cartographic records or provisions of treaties and agreements. They have not agreed to delineation, nor have they revealed their perception of LAC. The former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Gokhale, in a recent interview, opined that the Chinese have not clarified the LAC as they want to nibble more and more of the Indian territory. Additionally, Ashley Tellis has observed that the Chinese will never accept Indian presence through any of the resolution mechanisms that will hinder their negotiating stance in the future. What China wants is the entirety of the disputed borderlands simply on the strength of its claims and that it once possessed them. The result has been the creeping aggression. While 11 rounds of military talks have resulted in partial disengagement from areas in the north and south Pangong, the impasse at Hot Springs, Gogra, and Depsang continues. The area around Depsang is of strategic concern to us because it is an area where the geopolitical interests of both China and Pakistan merge. Any further unchecked ingress in the area will give the Chinese access to the Shock Valley, from where they could exert pressure from the eastern side of the Sasarla range. With Pakistan occupying the western side of the Sartora range, a physical merge of the two armies becomes possible, greatly enhancing the chances of a collusive threat and posing a threat to Siachen and areas in Ladakh. Now, Depsang has come into focus as the Chinese have blockaded a place called Y Junction. The Y Junction is about 17 kilometers from an advanced landing ground at Daulat Beg Oldie and 6 kilometers from a village called Gurse. The presence not only makes DBO vulnerable, but also poses a security threat to the recently built DSDBO road, which sustains our forces in that region. The Chinese action prevents us from patrolling points number 10, 11, 11A, 12, and 13, and staking claim to an area that we consider our territory. On the other hand, it enables the Chinese to block the critical access to our patrol points. It also enables them to further develop roads and infrastructure in an area that we consider as ours. Besides Depsang, there are also issues in Gogra and Hot Springs and Charding Ninglung Nala, or the canal is known as CNN. The present state of bilateral relations is best summed up by the foreign minister by observing that they are at crossroads. The future direction of the relations would depend on the approach China adopts. Also, any progress of the broader bilateral relationship would depend on establishing peace and tranquility on the borders. Implicit in the observation is that China will have to take measures to restore status quo ante as per 30th April and disengage by withdrawing from Hot Springs, Gogra, and Depsang. So technically, it is a strategy of expectation, or as one of the former army commanders observed, that it amounts to a strategy of hope. So we need to review our strategy before it turns into a strategy based on a wing and prayer. An analysis of our strategy indicates that it has been differential and accommodating towards resolving the border issue, but China has not reciprocated to our overtures. The word LAC itself in the Chinese mind signifies fluidity and flexibility and provides them ample opportunity for nibbling action and an opportunity to ingress up to their 1959 claim line. So there is a need to change tack, lest the situation develop into a long and an interminable standoff. The much awaited required defensive line, signifying a change of tack, was actually drawn by the Honorable Prime Minister when he stated at Leh in July 20 that no further expansionism would be tolerated. To my mind, there is a need to seriously review the term LAC and empower it with a certain amount of rigidity and solidity. As a political strategy, the LAC needs to be formalized into a non-negotiable ground position line, if need be, through a unilateral process of stabilization, consolidation, and legitimization. Stabilization through presence, consolidation through reinforced claims and electronic marking, and legitimization through publicity. The whole issue actually needs more visibility. The British too had to opt for a unilateral way while delineating the Ladakh-Tibet border around the beginning of the 20th century, I think in 1904 or 05 or so. Most of the British proposals for the frontier demarcation went unanswered by the Chinese. So this characteristic trait of the Chinese to not clarify issues or to formalize processes regarding border delineation resides in their DNA and has existed for more than 125 years. We should really not care for what the Chinese think or feel. The political legitimization of a reinforced LAC, even unilaterally, would create the basis for a military concept of operations entailing sting and singe. Meaning, if you encroach, you will be stung. And if you hold territory, then the ground will be made so hot that you will have to vacate. This politico-military strategy should be complemented diplomatically through external balancing and countervailing moves. So what would actually emerge is a unified politico-diplomatic military strategy. So what are the military actions that we have taken so far? We have prevented the PLA's further ingress and also done a pushback. Consequent to the Galwan clash, the Indian Army initiated some counter operations on 29th August, wherein we occupied some of our own unheld vantage locations on the Kailash ranges. The action certainly rattled the Chinese. as they were taken by surprise by a riposte, and it made them vulnerable at Moldo and in the Spangor salient. The vantage location forced the Chinese to resume military level talks and bid for a disengagement. So at the military level, what comes out clearly from views of the military leadership is that partial disengagement has been achieved. There has been no breakthrough at the 11th commander level talks for disengagement from the rest of the friction points, and the issues are under deliberation. It is also difficult to predict a time frame for the resolution. China continues to deploy mechanized elements and troops in the immediate depth. PLA is also exercising in the training areas with additional formations. There has been induction of equipment like light tanks, wheeled howitzers, and MBRNs. So, as regards the assessment of the situation and our intention, does a threat exist? Yes. Is it likely to escalate? The answer is cannot say. But China has some grand designs that we are unable to deduce. However, our guard is up, and we will continue a dialogue in a firm and a non-escalatory manner to ensure that the status quo is restored. So what are our options for a status quo? Coming to the operational strategies for land, there is an issue. In mountainous terrain, the army would need an asymmetric advantage in the force ratios for any offensive option. Building such favorable ratios, particularly in the mountainous terrain, is complex and difficult. Even a parity of forces is not enough and would put one into a defensive mold. Of course, quid pro quo options are available through surprise and flanking maneuvers. But in that case, the garrisoned forces would need to be sustained under hostile conditions. Moreover, the two essentials for quid pro quo, namely the element of surprise and the strategic criticality of the area to the adversary that we intend to seize, may not be available with a large-scale mobilization by the Chinese. Also, what needs to be factored is that logistically it's going to impose a huge cost to sustain the troops, and more in the event of a forced engagement. So we have limited options. But no matter what option we adopt, our greatest time-tested assets are the Indian soldiers. They are courageous, hardy, resolute, battle-hardened, and are imbued with a nationalist spirit of patriotism, pride, and sacrifice. They face hardships and fight against all odds to turn things around. This solid asset, however, cannot always fill in for lapses or absence of a sound strategy. But coming to the larger issue, one of the reasons that the Chinese are resorting to the creeping aggression, as per the former National Security Advisor, Mr. Shivshankar Menon, is that deterrence has broken down. Just blocking and preventing the Chinese does not provide deterrence. It is here that the relevance of air power increases, and it can play an important role in re-establishing the deterrence. Now, air power in recent wars has gained immense relevance and significance. By itself, it has not won wars, but has certainly contributed in large measure towards shaping favorable outcomes. By virtue of its unique traits, such as speed, flexibility, reach, lethality, and rapid response, it has become the weapon of choice. It is dynamic, can be calibrated, and provides a range of options in force application. This is particularly useful for the political leadership, which is often in a dilemma over the quantum of force to be applied in an emerging crisis. The Air Force can be employed in a visible and a non-visible role. The visible role would be missions towards dissuasion, deterrence, and coercion. The non-visible would be largely be missions in an enabling and supporting role. So how did we employ the Air Force? In the context of Ladakh, air power has been employed extensively in the non-visible and enabling role. Includes Air Defense Watch to ensure no violation of airspace, Airborne Command Post for monitoring and control, ISR for situational awareness, which is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, air maintenance for sustaining the troops in the northern areas, air mobility for induction of personnel and equipment, including tanks, armored personnel carriers, and other associated equipment, and also for casualty evacuation. But if one were to describe the nature of employment of air power in Ladakh, then it could be said that it has been in a detached and a buffered role well away from the LAC. So the Air Force, in a way, has not been part of any ground strategy or a joint concept of operations, but has maintained a 24/7 vigil, doing the heavy lifting and playing a supporting role for the army. Of course, if the situation worsens, then it is expected to plug in and play out the entire range of operations. Now, keeping in mind that the military standoff has reached a stage of deadlock, that is, devoid of deterrence, it could be opined that the Air Force was not employed in an optimal role. So then what are the reasons for the Air Force not being utilized optimally? There are various reasons which are not internal to the Air Force, but are external, which have contributed to the Air Force being kept backseat in the scheme of things. These reasons have also contributed over the years towards development of an air power blindness. The reasons could be used as inhibitors, as they have prevented the Air Force from operating in the visible role and contributing towards deterrence. So what are these inhibitors? I could list 8. These inhibitors are in the form of inadequate comprehension of air power, escalation concerns, differing views on employment of air power, mindsets, non-inclusion of Air Force in policy and strategy formulation, propensity for single service approaches, role of virtual domains and multi-domain operations, and the transformational changes in the armed forces. First is inadequate comprehension of the roles, functions, strengths, limitations of air power. It results in varied interpretations and leads to its suboptimal employment. In an integrated force, for maximum effectiveness, one would exploit the strengths and mask the limitations of the component services. In our case, very often the limitations are cited to show the ineffectiveness of air power. So it results in a hesitation in factoring air power in joint planning, while the need in contemporary operations is for a blend of land and air power solutions leveraging on their core competencies. Conflicts of the last 2 decades have shown that land and air power have both played a supported and a supporting role, depending on the operational contingency. Second is escalation. Employment of air power is often perceived as escalatory, as it could lead to uncontrolled and undesirable consequences. There is therefore a general reluctance to employ air power. However, this was proved wrong during the Balakot strike. In fact, it managed to restore an element of deterrence in dissuading Pakistan from its nefarious activities. Historically, there are very few examples where airstrikes have led to an escalation. In fact, ground offensives are seen more as invasions and have led to certain levels of escalation. Use of air power can be controlled through calibrated application and controlling the narrative. In fact, a present army chief had observed that Balakot demonstrated that if you play the escalatory game with skill, military ascendancy can be established in short cycles of conflict that do not necessarily lead to war. Now, as regards utilization of air power, differences arise over the employment of air power. The land forces expect employment of air power as per land power doctrines and concepts, as an example being to treat air power as an extension of artillery for immediate and predominant support in the contact battle. It is often not appreciated that air power has its own tenets and principles of employment. Back in the 1940s, this was the main reason why the US Army Air Corps split after the Army aviators within the service disagreed with the priority for the roles and missions, leading to the creation of the United States Air Force as an independent air force. Fourth is attitudes that inhibit effective use of air power. These attitudes are a carry forward of earlier mindsets that have over the years manifested in a kind of a viceroy cult in the senior military leadership with notions of suzerainty. In military parlance, it would be the urge for ownership and control of assets. It would be akin to a conglomerate culture where you wish to do everything yourself. This negates all efforts towards cooperation affecting jointness adversely. Fifth is inclusion. Air Force has had minimal representation in the China policy-making bodies of the government and is a cause of concern. The topmost body is the China Study Group formed in 1976. It reviews the border situation with China and formulates policies and strategies. While the Army and the other agencies are represented, the Air Force has no representation. The second body, Center for Contemporary China Studies, has a representation, but at a much lower level, and is also more of a research and an academic-oriented body. The third is the flag-level military meetings at the designated spaces. The Air Force has been seeking a representation for almost a decade in the China Study Group and the military meetings at Chushul and Moldo, but has been kept out of the loop. So the Air Force, in a way, has no role in the border control and management mechanisms. Ironically, the role of the Royal Air Force of Great Britain in the 1920s in controlling Mesopotamia was through a policy of air policing, mooted by none less than Winston Churchill. The RAF was inducted to complement the surface forces to cut down the expenditures. The seventh inhibitor is single service approaches or solutions. These are resorted to when threats are viewed and assessed through the land power lens and strategies formulated from the strengths, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities of land power. This leads to land-centric strategies. It has to be appreciated that what appears as a threat to the land forces may actually provide opportunities to the Air Force. For example, in the Ladakh area, geography has provided the Air Force with two very significant advantages. The area on the other side of the LAC being much more flatter, undulating terrain is absolutely barren and is unlike the steep mountain ranges on our side with their jagged peaks and narrow, deep gorges. Since the G219, which is the Western Artillery...
Sir, you got unmuted. Sir, you have to unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself, sir.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, sir.
So, the Chinese Air Force is well aware of these advantages and many others that the Air Force enjoys. So, viewed from a single service prism, then our approach would be more cautious and tentative than a more confident and assertive stance when joint views are factored in. Seventh is the understanding of virtual domains and multi-domain operations. Space, cyber, electronic warfare are in the virtual domains. Evolution and progression of warfare in the virtual domain demands that we need to pay special attention to leverage on the asymmetric advantages that they bestow on our military capabilities. Virtual domains exponentially enhance warfare capabilities through their enabling and disrupting actions. However, what needs to be remembered is that synergistic application of land, sea, and air power, which denote the raw and hard power, cannot be totally replaced by the virtual domains. Similarly, multi-domain operations today are the contemporary flavor of warfare. They have distinct advantages as they integrate and leverage kinetic and non-kinetic fires across domains to exploit windows of opportunity to dominate and gain battlefield ascendancy. But multi-domain operations does not mean that one single service starts to operate in all the domains, ruling out the need of the other services. The last is the transformational change. One of the transformational changes taking place in the Indian Armed Forces is the establishment of theatre commands. Decisions in this regard need to be arrived after consultations and deliberations with all the stakeholders. Moreover, prior to implementation, they need to be experimented and validated. The decision to establish the Integrated Air Defense Command was too hasty and has landed us on a slippery slope. The Air Defense Command was not recommended by the Kargil Review Committee or the group of ministers or the Naresh Chandra Committee or the Shekatkar Committee. Neither was it mooted by the Air Force, being the domain service. Its establishment came as an announcement and order and was not preceded by any deliberations or consultations. Now, there is no denying the fact that all air defense weapons belonging to the three services need to be integrated. Makes a very convincing argument for establishing an air defense integrated command. But what about the consequences? Moreover, there are institutionalized mechanisms for seamless integration in the present setup, which are more than adequate to have the desired joint structures. These mechanisms would have worked seamlessly even under the new envisaged theatre commands. These were never explored because a fanciful decision had to be implemented. The consequences are grave, as it is going to functionally split the Air Force into offensive and defensive roles with a mistaken belief that the offensive assets assigned to the theatre commands as and when formed could be employed solely in a segregated manner towards close support roles. It needs to be understood that the air assets cannot be divided into defensive and offensive roles. Many of the air defense assets, such as the fighters, the WACs, or the flight refueler aircraft, are all needed for the conduct of offensive operations. Just like a submarine may be tasked for defensive deployment of the coast or an offensive of enemy coast deployment, and a core tasked with a defensive operation may well be retasked for a limited offensive role. So also it is with the aircraft, except that for an aircraft, it can take place on the fly in a matter of seconds with just a couple of orders passed over the radio or over a data link. Hence, aircraft returning from a strike mission inside enemy territory may be retasked to take on an air defense role on return, subject to fuel and weapons. If anything, this would be complicated further by air defense systems like the S-400, which with its greatly extended ranges can also conduct operations against enemy planes flying well within adversary territory in support of own offensive operations. So for both offensive and defensive air operations to be rebalanced on a continuous and a dynamic basis as per the developing situation, there is a need for both to be placed under a single commander. Placing any of these under a commander exclusively for defensive operations would lead to suboptimal utilization. Either they would be underutilized and hence reduce the weight of attack for offensive operations, or they would be insufficient and hence ineffective in thwarting the enemy attacks. The flexibility further assumes importance due to the present reduced strength of air assets and the need to ensure their optimal employment. In the present structure, it is the Air Officer Commanding in Chief of the Air Command who controls both the defensive and offensive operations. As theatre commands take shape, the control would be exercised by the theatre commanders through the air component commanders. Now, air defense is a fundamental warfighting function of the Air Force, much like defensive land operations or defensive sea operations are to land and naval forces. And just like placing a pivot core with limited offensive role under different GOCNCs is unthinkable, so also is diversing the entire function of the air defense from offensive operations and replacing them with a different commander. Another important operational aspect to be borne in mind is that future wars would be in the form of skirmishes that would be short, intense, and swift. A formidable air defense that can cause unacceptable damage to an adversary air riposte would not only help in controlling the escalation, but also serve as a potent deterrent. This is only possible when the air operations are unified under a single regional commander. Operationally, the Air Defense Command will severely degrade the conduct of full spectrum, fast moving and effective operations. Now, what is noteworthy is that no country in the world has this model. And more significantly, China, as per a recent report, is adopting our existing model. The PLA has integrated the Air Force and the Army Air Defense elements in the Western Theatre Command under the Air Force chain of command by creating a combined air defense system without splitting the Air Force along functional lines. Compare that with the Air Defense Command model that we intend to establish. It's a step that would aggravate our blindness to air power and regress the Air Force back into the 1940s. Contrast this blindness with the importance the Chinese have accorded to air power. After learning valuable lessons in the 1991 Gulf War, today, the second most important position in the all-powerful Chinese Military Commission, CMC, headed by Xi Jinping, is held by an Air Force general. Now coming to the recommendations, while air power can deter, dissuade, and coerce, its efficacy depends on its capability. Though air power acquisitions are capital intensive, the gains in terms of providing deterrence will exponentially outweigh the costs. A special focus needs to be given to some of the critical acquisitions that have languished for long. Procurement of the 126 MMRCAs, the VACs, the refuelers, air defense systems, UAVs should be complemented with development of advanced landing grounds and airfields. The surface-to-surface missile capability also needs to be beefed up for initial rounds of no-contact warfare. Above all, there needs to be a much more closer and a comprehensive examination of theatre commands. The former Chief of Naval Staff, Admiral Arun Prakash, in an article in January this year, had asked the government to constitute a parliamentary committee with military advisors to oversee and guide transformational military reforms initiated a year ago. In this regard, it is gathered, as per media reports, that the government has constituted a committee 2 days ago for wider consultation and deliberations on formation of theatre commands, which certainly is a very welcome step. So to conclude, as regards the standoff, despite having displayed a spirit of accommodation in resolving the border dispute, China has not reciprocated to our peace overtures. We find ourselves in a kind of a quagmire wherein China seems to be controlling the narrative and calling the shots. This has happened as we have for too long calibrated and moderated our responses to the Chinese sensibilities. Continuing our extant approach would be doing more of the same and of no avail. There is now a need for some fresh thinking and a change of tack. This could be by switching from a reactive and a differential stance to one that is proactive and assertive, where we approach the whole issue from a position of strength and confidence. we need to put in place a unified politico-diplomatic military strategy. One instrument of national power that has been grossly underutilized is air power, which to my mind will turn things around. Besides, while we call out the Chinese land grabs as the coronavirus to portray their aggressive spread and creep, air power also has the ability, by virtue of its unique traits, for the genome tracking and sequencing of this threat with several options to vaccinate. The need of the hour is to synergize land and air solutions through a unified strategy, rather than continuing with the age-old land-centric solutions to address the issue. This would be in consonance with what our foreign minister has exhorted, that we need to stand our ground. Thank you, and Jai Hind.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for those hard-hitting. PLA is a COVID virus. It will mutate and keep reappearing and keep doing the salami slicing. It requires, yes, comprehensive strategy from the unified politico-military diplomatic lab. And that vaccination, we have to see that it comes through and the air power hesitancy is removed. Let's take, sir, within next 4 or 5 minutes, questions. The first question which has come, sir, from Group Captain Manish Srivastava. He says, he asked, what about the drone, role of drone in coming Air Force? Lessons learned from the recent Azerbaijan Nagorno-Karabakh war, sir. On drone, sir, role of drone, your thought.
Okay, drone warfare certainly has assumed significance because actually it has proved its battlefield prowess in this recent war that you spoke about, Azerbaijan-Armenian war. And it is not that the drone warfare is something new, because this drone warfare dates back to the 1980s. You know, when the Israelis very effectively used drones in the Bekaa Valley, and where the loss, where the results were so lopsided that the Syrians lost close to about 86 aircraft to one reported loss of the Israelis. Now, what has happened is the Azaris have very skillfully utilized the drones in this particular battle, where they were able to recover the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh that was actually under Armenian control for quite some time. Armenia reportedly, I think, has lost close to about 150 tanks and armored personnel carriers, some major ground air defense weapon systems, radars, besides the territory. So Azerbaijani victory could actually be credited rather to 3 types of weapons. One was the TB2 armed UAV, which they had procured from Turkey, the Harok loitering munition, and the long-range artillery that they had procured from Israel. In fact, the long-range artillery targeted a critical bridge that connected Armenia with Nagorno-Karabakh, disrupting replenishments and resupplies to the front. Also, the drones were able to attack the targets in the operational depth that actually had a very telling effect on the war. Having said that, what is to be noted is that drones are also vulnerable to modern layered air defense systems. The Libyan war shows that there was a lot of attrition of this TB2 Turkish drones, as well as the Chinese Wingloom drones. As regards the lessons for us, I think the drone warfare has huge significance, as we will encounter this in the future wars. Both our neighbors have drones. China has a very advanced UAV program. They have already exported the Wingloom model to many countries, including Pakistan. Pakistan too has, with the help of Turkey and China, a very fairly potent UAV program. They have used the indigenous armed UAV against the terrorists in the FATA region. So besides accelerating our UAV program on mission mode, we also need to be prepared with a drone counter program in terms of detection, engagement kinetically from the ground and the air, and non-kinetic measures like electronic jammers and directed energy weapons. We also need to watch out the technological advances in drones like the loyal wingman concept, using the swarm tactics where you overwhelm the air defenses, and also a new kind of a system which is coming up, which is known as the lethal autonomous warfare system that will embed artificial intelligence and will be able to operate autonomously without requirements of the command links. So I think we certainly...
Sir, I will take a last...
Okay.
Yes, sir. I'll just take a last question, sir.
Okay.
You have talked about your apprehensions and dichotomies and all the differences of the new defense restructuring. But of course, government has announced that they will be taking all the inputs from all the services and to bring everybody on the single page. Question to you is from Wing Commander Ajay Mishra on this part. How you see and what is your viewpoint how to achieve jointness? In fact, jointness is a wrong word. Best would be seamless integration, that is synergy. How you achieve jointness or synergy?
Okay, so I think if you really see the Department of Military Affairs tasking for theaterization, I think it includes three aspects. Facilitate restructuring for optimal utilization of assets by bringing about jointness in operations, including through the establishment of joint stroke theater commands. But what is the ultimate aim of this exercise? It should be to get a unified strategy so that you're on the same page and synergized and efficient application of combat power, which will give us the necessary combat capability and military effectiveness to deter or win wars. For this, you would require unity of command, that is placing assets under one head, but more importantly, unity of aim and unity of effort. Now, in our case, what seems to be happening is we are excessively concentrating on the formation of the structure and its stewardship. So all that we hear is how many theaters, who's going to help, with very little focus on a unified strategy, optimum utilization of assets, and jointness. In fact, we have also decided the theater commanders, because as per reports, I think probably we are seeking extension for a few. We seem to think that announcement of theater commands by merging formations and nominating theater commanders will resolve issues. It will not work that way. There are two big beasts to tackle, resources and jointness, which require a reorientation of various issues besides joint structures. Some issues that will drive both jointness and optimal utilization of resources are roles, functions, and missions. Now, these have not been clearly identified for the three services, which result in duplication and wastage. So a little bit of thought process needs to be given to this before we progress into theater commands. Threats, challenges, and interests. We need to differentiate between what is a threat, what is a challenge, and what is an interest. We seem to perhaps merge everything together. Now, threats is something which is imminent, which is likely to cause harm. Challenges is something which is down the line.
Thanks, sir, for those words. I think from here, the input will definitely go to the concerned. All these factors need to be taken into account. I now request Sri Vineet Goenkaji, the man behind our think tank, CKS India, an ardent champion of data sovereignty, who has authored the book on data sovereignty, The Pursuit of Supremacy. He is governing council member of Center for Railway Information System, former member task force of IT, Ministry of Shipping, Road Transport and Highway, and also does a lot of things in BJP. I will request Vineetji for his concluding comments. Vineetji, over to you.
Thank you, Air Vice Marshal Sinha. It's always a treat to the ears to listen to veterans. And when you listen to Air Marshal Soman in any forum, I think it's a big treat. Sir, Ram Ram from my side, sir, to you. So, sir is currently in Pune, and I was there in Pune in 2001, the same place. It's a common thing. Sir, it was always a treat, and as I said, people should know that what you have done in the AD and the WAC side, the Western Air Command, and the work which you have done, you revamped the entire AD there, which should be known to the people, and people who have just joined or may not know details. Your role in the Chumar standoff should also be known to people. You actually were at the helm of the affairs, and fantastic delivery was done that time. I think that the new generation should know, and those who don't know the Western Air Command, it expands from Kashmir to Rajasthan, and maybe probably 10 permanent air stations are there. If I can recollect properly, Adhampur, Ambala, maybe Batinda, Chandigarh, or maybe Hindon, to name few of them. If I'm not forgotten, is Pathankot is also one of the part of that, and one of the largest one, more than 200 properties and with 6 forward bases. So it's a large command. You commanded it, and And I think that was a fantastic role which you played. And today, when you spend this time, I would also like to recognize certain special presence today who were there in the audience before Dr. Nagaratna gives you the formal vote of thanks on behalf of everybody. First, I would like to thank you on behalf of Lieutenant General Shekatkar and Lieutenant General Patil, the chairman, the vice chairman of the CKS. So, in fact, the thought of CKS came from Lieutenant General Shekatkar, and he has conveyed his regards to you, sir, for today's delivery. Today, we had fantastic people, apart from my colleague, Air Vice Marshal Sinha, Dr. Nagaratna, Dr. Deepa, and Falguni Rajput. I would like to recognize we had very unique presence, and I could see rare Admiral Sudarshan Shrikhande, the man who said, loose lips sing the ship. Admiral Shrikhande, thank you very much for coming. I could also see Vice Admiral R.B. Pandit, Vice Admiral Pashricha, Air Marshal Trika, Air Vice Marshal Pradhan on the screen today. I saw Air Vice Marshal P.N. Kaushik, Air Vice Marshal Padgaonkar, and Air Vice Marshal Amit Aneja. Of course, they were Group Captain Anil Markikar was there. I could see Group Captain Osangibad, Group Captain B.K. Singh, Wing Commander Rodris, Wing Commander Shetty, Wing Commander Shanta Ratanji, Wing Commander A.K. Sharma, and Wing Commander Ajay Mishra. Air Commodore Ked Thakkar was also there on the screen. And today the list is very big. And I should mention one more name, Lieutenant General Pandit, a very special guest today, listening to Air Marshal Soman, Colonel Marotra, Colonel Pandey. We had some friends from RAW also. I could see Jangaraji there on there, and there were people from NIC. Dr. Ravi Bhera could be seen there. And of course, there are a few names I should not forget and mention. Srimati Vijaya Lakshmi, the Director of Center for Soft Power. Her coming made this session a very good session to listen. My friend whose soul always loiters around on the front ends, on the boundaries of the country, Giridhar Mavidi, I could see him here. So there are many more names, and I could have forgotten some names, or I would have missed some names because they were logged in with their proxy names or some series like 555888. So I could not make out who have logged in, but what I understand is a lot of people in the uniform, of the uniform, were there today in the listening. So I would like to thank them all for taking out time to come and listen to this talk. I would request Dr. Nagaratna to give a formal word of thanks. Thank you, Air Marshal Soman, for coming.
Thank you, sir. A very good evening to one and all. It's my pleasure again to extend a formal vote of thanks during this event, which in fact is the concluding part of the 5-part talk series, Thus Spake Generals. I, on behalf of Center for Knowledge Sovereignty and each of the participants of today's, thank our esteemed speaker of today's talk, Veteran Air Marshal SS Soman, for delivering an extremely informative and interesting talk on the most important topic, relevance of air power in the Ladakh Standoff. Your talk, which makes a clear and comprehensive review of the issue, the Ladakh Standoff, that, as you remark, involves political as well as military strategy, as well as the impact of the standoff on the bilateral relationship between India and China, was an extremely informative and interesting one. So, your talk covered wide issues, including analyzing the effectiveness of the strategies we have so far adopted in the context of Ladakh Standoff, as well as in suggesting the way forward, including strategies essential for us to show our preparedness to face a similar crisis again, if any. Sir, your talk, apart from critically analyzing the extent of employment of air power in the region, has also clearly indicated the need for reviewing our strategies, including credible deterrence, crisis jointness, and many others, including, most importantly, the need to design a unified politico-diplomatic strategy, which will have immense value to safeguard the region. Thank you so much, sir. I also take the privilege of expressing deep sense of appreciation and thanks to our own team from CKS for organizing the talk series. Most importantly, to Shri Vinod Bhatia for leading the team and for planning the entire series of the talk as well as today's event. I thank Air Vice Marshal Pranay Sinha sir for moderating the sessions and laying down the foundation of even today's event with his opening remarks. I thank Ms. Deepa for giving introductory remarks and anchoring all the events so far. I thank Paresh for providing all the support in arranging the events, including today's. Most importantly, a heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed participants of today's event, as well as each of the 5 sessions. Your presence, in fact, has made the entire talks, including today's, an extremely meaningful and important one for us. Thanks to each one of you. With the kind permission of the speaker and all the participants, I request to close the call.
Thank you. Thank you.